A 31-year-old woman set out on a solo multi-day hike in Colorado, but vanished into the vast wilderness instead. After an intensive 2-year search yielded nothing, her trail went cold, leaving only the question of how an experienced outdoorswoman could disappear. The first hint of an answer came from the discovery of her degraded gear. A memory card found concealed in her shoe would eventually reveal the desperate message she had left behind. The mandatory attendance briefing for the Denver Police Department's newly promoted command staff began promptly at 8 a.m. on September 14, 2015. The room, filled with officers stepping into roles of heightened responsibility and scrutiny, was defined by a sense of rigid punctuality and expectation. When the name Piper Crumbweed was called during roll call, it was met with silence. In the structured world of law enforcement, missing the first day of a command assignment wasn't just unprofessional. It was a glaring anomaly. Piper Crumbweed, 31, was known throughout the department for her meticulous nature, tactical precision, and unwavering reliability. This promotion was a significant achievement, the culmination of years of dedicated service. Her absence was immediately alarming. Initial attempts to contact her failed. Calls went directly to a full voicemail box, suggesting her phone had been off or out of service for some time. The concern escalated rapidly, and department officials contacted her parents, Jarek and Na Crum. The information they provided shifted the anxiety from a missed appointment to a potential crisis in the high country. They explained that Piper had taken authorized leave right before her promotion took effect. Recognizing the demands of the upcoming job, she had sought a period of decompression, a necessary reset before the pressures of command consumed her life. Her chosen method was ambitious and characteristic, a solo, multi-day thru-hike deep within the rugged expanse of Rocky Mountain National Park, RMNP. It was a trip meant to clear her head, a chance to immerse herself in the high-altitude wilderness she loved. The problem was stark. She was scheduled to complete her hike 2 days earlier, on September 12th. By the morning of the 14th, she was significantly overdue, and her parents had heard nothing since she began the hike. Jarek and Na were already grappling with rising panic. They knew their daughter's capabilities. Piper wasn't just an experienced hiker comfortable in the demanding Colorado terrain. She was a trained police officer. She understood risk assessment, navigation, and wilderness survival better than most. For her to vanish without a trace suggested something far more serious than simply getting lost or suffering a minor injury. If Piper was missing, something external had intervened. By midday on September 14th, Piper Crumbweed was officially declared a missing person. The urgency was palpable. This wasn't a typical case of a lost tourist. This was one of their own. The investigation began at the last known physical location. Park rangers quickly located Piper's vehicle parked securely at the designated trailhead specified in the backcountry permit she had filed. The car was locked and undisturbed, offering no immediate clues. It sat silently, a stark marker of where her journey began, while the surrounding mountains towered overhead, indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. Investigators established the timeline based on the last confirmed contact. A brief text message sent to her mother 5 days earlier on the morning of September 9th, from the vicinity of the park entrance. It confirmed she was starting her ascent as planned, and that cell service would soon be non-existent. After that message, the digital trail went cold. Piper Crumbweed had shouldered her heavy pack, complete with a blue backpack and a green foam sleeping pad, and walked into the vastness of the Rockies, seemingly dissolving into the thin mountain air. The mobilization in response to Piper's disappearance was immediate and massive. Rocky Mountain National Park is a staggering landscape encompassing over 415 square miles of some of the most rugged, high-altitude terrain in the United States. It's a place of towering peaks, deep-shadowed valleys, and weather systems that can shift from benign to lethal in a matter of hours. Searching for a single individual in such an environment is an overwhelming undertaking, a race against time and the elements. The initial strategy focused strictly on the itinerary Piper had filed with the Park Service. It was a challenging multi-day loop, traversing well-known passes and established camping zones. By the morning of September 15th, the park was inundated with personnel. Park rangers, specialized search and rescue, SAR teams, volunteers, and officers from the Denver PD converged, establishing a command center near the trailhead. The atmosphere was one of focused intensity, the air thick with the thrum of helicopter rotors and the crackle of radio communications. The aerial search was relentless. Pilots navigated treacherous wind currents, conducting low-altitude grid searches, scanning the vast expanses of alpine tundra and dense forests below. They looked for any sign of disturbance, any flash of unnatural color that might indicate the presence of a campsite or discarded gear. On the ground, dog teams were deployed, attempting to catch any scent trail before the elements washed it away. The searchers pushed themselves to the limits of physical endurance, battling the effects of altitude and the emotional weight of searching for a fellow officer. They knew that if Piper was immobilized, she had the training to signal for help, conserve her resources, and make herself visible. Yet, day after day, the teams returned exhausted and empty-handed. Jarek and Nakrum arrived at the command center, their faces etched with anxiety. They provided investigators with exhaustive lists of Piper's gear, down to the color of her water bottles and the brand of her hiking shoes. They described her hiking habits, her meticulous preparation, and her cautious nature. They clung to the hope that her skills and experience would keep her alive until help arrived. Simultaneously, detectives in Denver began the routine but necessary background investigation. They examined Piper's life, looking for any hidden stressors or conflicts that might explain her disappearance. They reviewed her recent case files, searching for disgruntled suspects who might have sought retaliation. They examined her financials, her communication records, and her personal relationships. The results were uniformly negative. Piper appeared to be in a good place, with no unusual activity, financial distress, or personal conflicts noted. The investigation confirmed what everyone suspected. The answer was somewhere in the mountains. Days stretched into a week. The initial saturation of her planned route yielded nothing. No discarded gear, no signs of a disturbed campsite, no indication she had even made it past the first day's ascent. It was baffling. How could such an experienced hiker vanish without a trace on a marked trail system? The wilderness remained stubbornly silent. It was during this period of stalled progress that investigators uncovered an unusual detail that dramatically shifted the focus of the search. While examining Piper's financial records and local purchases, detectives found a requisition form from a specialized mountaineering outfitter in Boulder. Dated 3 weeks before her trip, the form detailed a request for high-end technical ice climbing gear, specialized crampons, ice axes, ropes, and anchors designed for glacial travel. This equipment was far beyond what was necessary for the thru-hike she had planned. More importantly, the requisition had been canceled by Piper herself just 2 days after it was submitted. This discovery ignited a new, alarming theory. Had Piper planned a secret, unauthorized detour? Was the filed itinerary a decoy? Investigators knew that Piper was ambitious and constantly sought to push her physical limits. The canceled requisition suggested she had been contemplating a highly technical ascent, perhaps into one of the park's remote and treacherous ice fields. It was a compelling narrative. A skilled officer seeking a final extreme challenge before settling into a desk-heavy promotion might have decided to attempt a difficult climb spontaneously, even after canceling the gear rental. If she had fallen or become trapped in one of these high-altitude glacial areas, the chances of locating her were slim. The terrain was unforgiving, the conditions extreme. This lead felt tangible, a behavioral clue that seemed to fit Piper's personality. Authorities made the difficult decision to divert significant resources to this new possibility. The operation shifted from a standard wilderness search to a high-risk technical rescue mission. Specialized alpine teams trained in glacial travel and crevasse rescue were deployed to specific areas associated with the research found near the requisition paperwork. These areas were remote, far from any established trails, characterized by unstable ice and the constant threat of avalanche. The search operation in the ice fields was grueling and dangerous. The environment was stark, a world of blinding white and deep-shadowed gray. The silence was broken only by the roar of the wind and the crunch of crampons on ice. Helicopters navigated treacherous downdrafts to insert teams onto the glaciers. The pilots performed maneuvers that pushed the limits of their aircraft, hovering precariously close to the ice faces to allow observers to scan for any sign of color against the monochrome landscape. On the ice, the teams moved methodically, roped together, the tension visible in their movements. They used long poles to probe the snowpack for hidden crevasses, gaping chasms in the ice where a fall would be fatal. They employed specialized listening devices, hoping to detect any sound beneath the surface. They searched for days, battling altitude sickness, dehydration, and the psychological toll of operating in such a hostile environment. Every dark shape on the ice, every shadow in a crevasse, raised the possibility of a discovery, only to be dismissed upon closer inspection. The risks taken by the SAR teams were considerable. The operation was fraught with peril. During one particularly grueling ascent, a localized avalanche was triggered by the shifting ice, the roar of the cascading snow and debris echoing through the valley. The avalanche narrowly missed a search team, the realization of the near disaster underscoring the extreme danger of the environment. In another incident, a helicopter conducting a low-altitude sweep encountered sudden whiteout conditions, forcing the pilot to execute an emergency landing on a narrow ridge. The aircraft was buffeted by high winds, and the crew was stranded for several hours until the weather cleared. Yet, despite the intensive effort and the significant dangers faced, the ice fields yielded nothing. There was no trace of Piper Crumb. The theory, while compelling, remained just that, a theory. The technical search was eventually scaled back. The requisition, while intriguing, appeared to be a dead end, a discarded plan that had cost the investigation precious time and resources. During this intense focus on the high-altitude regions, the routine canvassing of local businesses and trailheads continued at a lower priority. It was during this phase that a crucial oversight occurred. Investigators briefly considered the High Alpine Lodge, a remote seasonal establishment located slightly off the main trails. However, because it was not on Piper's planned route and seemed an unlikely detour for a solo hiker focused on covering distance, they dismissed the likelihood of her having visited. No one was dispatched to interview the staff. It was a seemingly minor decision made in the heat of a massive operation, but it meant a critical potential source of information remained untapped. As September ended, the weather in the Rockies began to turn. The first heavy snows blanketed the peaks, and the temperatures plummeted. The window for active searching was closing rapidly. With no concrete leads and the terrain becoming increasingly hostile, the massive search operation was scaled back. The command center was disassembled, and the volunteers were sent home. For Jarek and Na Krum, the silence was agonizing. The transition from an active search to a missing person case felt like an admission of defeat. They refused to accept that their daughter had simply vanished. Throughout the winter of 2015 and into the spring thaw of 2016, they organized private searches. They channeled their grief into action, hiring specialized teams and continuing to canvass the park whenever conditions allowed. They walked the trails, calling her name, driven by a desperate hope. But the mountains remained silent. A year passed, and the disappearance of Officer Piper Crumbweed remained a complete, baffling mystery. July 2017. The high country of Rocky Mountain National Park was deep in the midst of summer. The alpine meadows were vibrant with wildflowers, the peaks still capped with remnants of the winter snowpack. Nearly 2 years had passed since Officer Piper Crumbweed had vanished. The case had gone cold, the initial urgency replaced by a dull, persistent ache of unanswered questions. For investigators, it remained an open file, a mystery characterized by a complete lack of evidence. For Jarek and Na Krum, it was a perpetual state of suspended grief, a life paused in the moment of their daughter's disappearance. Ellen Wilder was not thinking about missing persons. He was a field biologist employed by the U.S. Geological Survey, tasked with the grim work of documenting the spread of invasive beetle kill patterns in the park's forests. The beetles were decimating the pine populations, leaving behind swaths of dead gray trees, a ghostly reminder of the ecological changes sweeping through the region. His work was meticulous and solitary, often taking him into dense, less-traveled sections of the park, far from the scenic vistas frequented by tourists. He moved through the wilderness with a practiced ease, his attention focused on the minutiae of the forest ecosystem. On the afternoon of July 21st, Ellen was working in a rugged area characterized by steep slopes and dense undergrowth. He moved slowly, his attention focused on the bark of the trees, recording data on his tablet. The air was still and warm, heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. The silence of the forest was broken only by the buzzing of insects and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. He was several miles from the nearest established trail, immersed in the solitude of the wilderness. It was late afternoon when Ellen navigated a particularly dense tangle of fallen trees, the result of a past windstorm. The area was a graveyard of lodgepole pines, their skeletal branches creating a nearly impenetrable barrier. He was forced to climb over the massive trunks, maneuvering through the deadfall, the exertion taxing even his experienced muscles. As he scrambled over a large, uprooted tree, A flash of unnatural color caught his eye, partially hidden beneath a canopy of fallen branches. It was a grayish-blue synthetic fabric, contrasting sharply with the organic browns and greens of the forest floor. It was partially buried beneath a layer of pine needles and dirt, tucked deep within the tangle of branches. His initial reaction was irritation. Despite the park's strict regulations, littering remained a persistent problem, even in these remote areas. He assumed this was another instance of carelessness, expensive gear abandoned by irresponsible campers who didn't respect the wilderness ethic. Muttering under his breath about the disrespect for the pristine environment, he approached the object, intending to collect it and pack it out. It was a small dome-style tent, but it was in a state of extreme disrepair. The fabric was tattered and stained with dark patches of mold and dirt. Several holes were ripped in the material, the fabric stiff and foul-smelling. It didn't appear to have been set up as a campsite. Rather, it looked as if it had been blown there by the wind, coming to rest against the fallen trees, where it had remained hidden for a significant period. The scene felt desolate, abandoned, a silent testament to the relentless passage of time. Ellen began the process of cleaning up the mess. He pulled the tent fabric, intending to bundle it up. The smell of mildew and decay was strong. As he did so, several items spilled out from the folds of the material. Degraded clothing, a fleece jacket, hiking pants, a pair of socks, and a pair of hiking shoes found near the tent. The sight of the personal items shifted his perspective. This didn't feel like typical tourist litter. The clothing was heavily soiled and degraded by exposure to the elements. The shoes were worn and caked with mud. Then he found it, a waterlogged wallet tucked into the pocket of the fleece jacket. He knelt, the sense of unease growing. He opened the wallet carefully, the leather slimy to the touch, the material threatening to disintegrate in his hands. Inside, protected by a plastic sleeve but still severely damaged, were several U.S. documents and an identification card. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He looked at the photo ID, but the image was ruined. Water damage and mold had obscured the face, rendering it unrecognizable, a ghostly blur. But the presence of official documents, a wallet, items that no one would intentionally discard was alarming. This was not litter. This was something serious. He realized he was standing at a potential crime scene. His irritation forgotten, Ellen quickly retrieved his satellite phone from his pack. His hands trembling slightly, he powered it on and waited for a signal. He called the park ranger dispatch, his voice tight with urgency, reporting the discovery of abandoned gear and personal documents in a remote section of the park. He provided his exact GPS coordinates and a detailed description of the discovery. Park rangers arrived on the scene within hours, followed closely by investigators from the local sheriff's office and the FBI's Wilderness Crimes Unit. The area was immediately secured, the perimeter established, and the meticulous process of forensic investigation began. The discovery of the documents elevated the situation beyond a simple case of abandoned property. The items were meticulously photographed in situ, every detail documented before being carefully collected and transported to a specialized forensic lab in Denver. The atmosphere at the lab was tense. The discovery of potential evidence in a long, cold missing person case generated a mixture of hope and apprehension. At the lab, the process of cataloging the evidence began immediately. The air in the examination room was sterile, a stark contrast to the organic decay of the discovery site. Each item was examined under bright lights, analyzed for any trace evidence. The degraded documents were prioritized, sent to a specialist for restoration attempts. A forensic technician tasked with examining the clothing and footwear picked up one of the hiking shoes. It was a low-cut shoe, primarily beige or light tan in color with accents of a faded pink or salmon color on the sides and tongue. The laces were a matching faded pink and were loosely tied. It was heavily soiled with dirt, dust, and grime, showing significant wear and tear. As part of the standard procedure for identification, the technician needed to determine the shoe size. This information, combined with the documents, could help identify the owner. The technician flipped the hiking shoe over, giving it a gentle tap to shake off any loose dirt. They then reached inside, feeling for the size tag on the tongue or inner lining. As their gloved fingers explored the interior, they hit something hard and unexpected. It was lodged under the worn-out insole, tucked deep in the heel. The technician paused, their brow furrowed. It felt too rigid to be part of the shoe itself, too intentionally placed to be random debris. Carefully, they peeled back the insole. Concealed underneath was a small, rectangular object. The technician's breath caught. They recognized it instantly. The room fell silent as they used a pair of forceps to carefully pull it out. It was a black SD memory card. The discovery sent a jolt of excitement through the lab. The technician held the card up, gripping it delicately between their thumb and forefinger. The gold-colored connectors were visible, dulled with corrosion, but the casing looked intact. In the context of a potential crime scene, a hidden memory card was a massive find. It implied intention, a conscious decision to save information. The realization sank in. Someone had deliberately hidden this card, hoping it would one day be found. The implications were staggering. After 2 years of silence, the mountains had finally given up a clue. A potential voice from the past, sealed inside a tiny piece of plastic, hidden in a dirty hiking shoe. The long silence was suddenly, dramatically broken. The SD card's discovery instantly changed the course of the investigation. But even before the card could be analyzed, the other items found at the scene provided the first major breakthrough. The specialized team working on the degraded documents managed to recover enough partial information, a name fragment, a date of birth, from the waterlogged ID card to cross-reference it with active missing person cases. At the same time, they compared the specifics of the gear, the tent brand, the hiking shoe model, the type of clothing, with the exhaustive list provided by Jarek and mRNA Crumbweed in 2015. The match was definitive. The abandoned gear belonged to Piper Crumbweed. The confirmation brought a mix of complex emotions. For the Crumbweed family, it was a devastating final confirmation that Piper had likely died in the wilderness. Yet, it also offered the first real, tangible connection to their daughter in 2 years. It ended the agonizing uncertainty, replacing it with the harsh reality of loss. For the investigators, it validated their efforts and added a layer of profound importance to the discovery. The focus of the case shifted from a missing person to a potential homicide investigation. The team's attention immediately turned to the SD card. The circumstances of its discovery were crucial. Piper Crumbweed wasn't just a hiker, she was a trained police officer. She understood evidence preservation, chain of custody, and the importance of documentation. The fact that the SD card was intentionally hidden in her shoe, beneath the insole, was deeply significant. It was a deliberate act, a calculated decision made under extreme duress. Investigators were certain the card contained critical evidence, perhaps images of an attacker, a video recording of the events leading up to her disappearance, or a final message explaining what had happened. They theorized that Piper, anticipating her fate, had hidden the card to preserve the information, choosing a spot that was unlikely to be found by chance, but would certainly be examined if her gear was ever discovered. It was a testament to her training and her resilience, a final act of defiance. The SD card represented the most important piece of evidence in the case. It held the potential to solve the mystery of Piper Crumbweed's disappearance. The card was immediately rushed to a specialized digital forensics lab at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, where it was given top priority. The anticipation was intense. The answers seemed within reach. At the lab, the atmosphere was electric. The team of digital forensic experts understood the high stakes. They began the data extraction process immediately, but their initial attempts failed. The card, despite being shielded within the shoe, had been exposed to the elements for 2 years. The constant temperature changes, the freezing cold of the Rocky Mountain winters and the heat of the summers, combined with moisture that had seeped into the shoe, had severely degraded the internal components. The card was physically intact, but the data on the microchips was badly corrupted. The internal circuitry was damaged, and the memory sectors were degraded. The first attempts to read it failed. The specialized software designed to recover deleted or damaged data couldn't recognize the file structure. The card was unresponsive, dead. The data seemed unsalvageable. The setback was crushing. The realization that their only significant lead, the potential voice of the victim, might be useless devastated the investigators. The hope that had surged with the card's discovery faded, replaced by a familiar sense of frustration. The Crumbweed family was informed of the situation, adding another layer of anguish to their prolonged suffering. They had been so close to answers, only to have them snatched away by the cruel indifference of time and the elements. But the lab team refused to give up. They escalated their recovery efforts, using advanced techniques rarely seen outside of high-level national security cases. They tried to bypass the corrupted control chip, hoping to read the data directly from the memory modules. This required a process called chip-off forensics, where the memory chips are physically removed from the card's circuit board and placed in a specialized reader. The process was delicate and extremely risky. The SD card's internal components were microscopic, requiring specialized equipment and incredibly steady hands. The technicians worked under high magnification, meticulously cleaning the internal circuitry and attempting delicate microsoldering to repair damaged connections. The team worked around the clock, fueled by adrenaline and the weight of expectation. The specialized equipment hummed constantly, a soundtrack to the tedious effort of rebuilding a digital life from the edge of oblivion. A critical moment came during an advanced attempt to dry the card's internal microcomponents using a specialized heating process. The procedure was designed to remove any residual moisture that might be interfering with the electrical signals. But the card's degraded state made it unpredictable. The internal components were fragile, with microscopic tolerances. The technicians monitored the process closely, the tension in the room palpable. As the temperature rose, a sudden electrical surge occurred. A localized short circuit sparked within the chip's microscopic pathways. Alarms blared on the monitoring equipment. A faint wisp of smoke came from the specialized reader. The acrid smell of burning plastic filled the sterile air. The team reacted instantly, cutting the power and aborting the procedure. The near-fatal error almost destroyed the evidence completely. A few milliseconds longer, and the internal memory modules would have been fried, permanently erasing the data. The realization that they had come so close to losing everything emphasized the fragility of the evidence. The air in the lab was thick with the smell of ozone and the weight of the near disaster. The team was forced to accept the devastating possibility that the data was unsalvageable. The lab team paused, reevaluating their approach. The aggressive recovery methods had proven too risky. They switched to a slower, more meticulous strategy, attempting to rebuild the data bit by bit, a process that could take weeks or even months with no guarantee of success. They were working against the clock, aware that every moment increased the risk of further degradation. While awaiting further results from the lab, investigators refocused their attention on the discovery site. The location of the tent and gear raised new questions. Why was the equipment scattered and abandoned instead of at a campsite? If Piper was injured or unable to move, why were there no signs of her remains near the gear? The state of the scene was confusing, suggesting a story of struggle and desperation. They conducted meticulous grid searches in the area surrounding the discovery site. Specialized teams, including cadaver dogs trained to detect the scent of human decomposition even after years, scoured the dense forest. They combed the rocky slopes and nearby streams, searching for any trace of human remains or the missing camera that likely went with the SD card. The terrain was difficult, the undergrowth thick. The searches expanded outward in concentric circles, covering several square miles of rugged wilderness. They used ground-penetrating radar and aerial drones with high-resolution cameras to scan the area for any anomalies that might indicate a hidden grave. But they found nothing conclusive. No remains, no camera, no additional clues that could explain the circumstances of Piper's disappearance. The mystery deepened. The discovery of the gear had confirmed that Piper was in the park, but the circumstances surrounding the abandoned tent and the hidden SD card remained agonizingly unclear. The investigation stalled again, waiting for a breakthrough from the digital forensics lab, hoping the damaged SD card still held the answers they desperately sought. The silence of the wilderness seemed to mock their efforts, hiding the truth behind a veil of indifference. Weeks turned into a month as the digital forensics lab continued the painstaking process of data recovery. The work was agonizingly slow, a microscopic reconstruction of fragmented digital information. The investigators waited, the case suspended in a state of limbo, entirely dependent on the success or failure of the lab team. The specialized equipment hummed constantly, a testament to the tedious effort of rebuilding a digital life from the brink of oblivion. The technicians worked in shifts, their eyes strained from the constant focus on the microscopic details of the damaged memory chips. Then, in late August 2017, a partial breakthrough occurred. The discovery of the coordinates injected a new sense of urgency into the investigation. It provided a specific location, a target for a focused search operation. The implications were huge. If Piper had been at these coordinates, the answers to the mystery might be found there. Authorities immediately organized an expedition to the location. Given the difficult terrain and the potential complexity of the cave system, a specialized search and rescue tactical team was assembled. This was not a standard hiking trail. It was a remote wilderness area that required technical expertise and specialized equipment. The team was made up of experienced mountaineers, cave rescue specialists, and tactical officers prepared for the possibility of hazardous conditions or even a crime scene. They were equipped with technical climbing gear, specialized lighting, and portable communication systems. The expedition launched in early September 2017. The team embarked on a multi-day operation. The approach to the coordinates was grueling. They navigated through thick forests, crossed fast-moving streams, and climbed steep, rocky slopes. The terrain was treacherous, characterized by loose scree and unstable rock formations. The risk of injury was constant. They had to use technical maneuvering, with ropes to navigate the steep inclines and sheer drop-offs. The exertion was extreme, the thin air taxing their endurance. The silence of the wilderness was absolute, broken only by the sound of their own movements and the wind whistling through the canyons. As they approached the target area, the landscape became increasingly rugged and desolate. Limestone cliffs rose sharply from the forest floor. The ground was riddled with fissures and depressions. The karst topography created a maze of fractured rock and stunted trees. The atmosphere was oppressive, the silence profound. They were miles from the nearest trail, in an area that seemed untouched by human presence. The coordinates led them to a narrow fissure in the rock face, partially hidden by vegetation. It was easy to miss, a dark shadow in the rugged landscape. It was an unmarked cave entrance, hidden from casual observation. The entrance was small, requiring the team to crawl through a narrow passage. The rock pressed in on them, the darkness absolute. The passage opened into a larger chamber, the air cold and damp. The team entered the cave system cautiously, their headlamps cutting through the absolute darkness. The silence was broken only by the dripping of water and the sound of their own movements. The cave was complex, with multiple passages branching off from the main chamber. The beam of their headlamps lit up the rough rock walls and the uneven floor, with shadows dancing on the edges of their vision. The atmosphere was claustrophobic, the weight of the mountain pressing down on them. They began a systematic search of the cave, moving slowly and methodically. They looked for any sign of disturbance, any indication that someone had been there. Near the entrance of the main chamber, where the faint light from outside still penetrated the gloom, they made a discovery. Partially buried beneath a layer of dust and debris was an aluminum water bottle. It was a specific type of bottle, distinctive in its design and color. The team photographed it in place before collecting it as evidence. The bottle was dented and scratched, but otherwise intact. It was sent back to the forensic lab for analysis. Jarek and mRNA Crumbweed were shown photographs of the water bottle. They identified it immediately. It was one that Piper carried on all her hikes, a gift from her father. The emotional impact of the discovery was profound. It was the first tangible proof that Piper had been in the cave. It was a heartbreaking connection to their daughter's final moments. However, the forensic testing on the bottle yielded disappointing results. Due to the environmental degradation over the 2 years, no usable DNA or fingerprints could be recovered. The bottle had been exposed to the damp conditions of the cave, erasing any trace evidence that might have linked Piper or anyone else to the object. The bottle was clean, offering no forensic answers. The evidence was highly circumstantial. The water bottle, combined with the metadata from the SD card, strongly suggested that Piper was in the cave, but it didn't definitively prove it, and it didn't explain what had happened to her there. The mystery deepened, becoming more complex and agonizingly unclear. How did her gear end up miles away from the cave? If she was injured or incapacitated in the cave, why did she leave? And what prompted her to hide the SD card in her shoe? The cave expedition had provided a new location, a new focus for the investigation, but it had also generated more questions than answers. The investigators were left staring at a map, tracing the distance between the cave and the discovery site, trying to understand the movements of a missing officer in the final moments of her life. The case remained unsolved. The truth was hidden somewhere in the rugged wilderness of the Rockies, concealed within the darkness of the unmarked cave. The ambiguity of the cave discovery left the investigation in a precarious position. While the metadata and the water bottle strongly suggested Piper's presence in the remote location, the lack of definitive forensic evidence meant they couldn't rule out other possibilities. The connection was circumstantial, and in a case involving a missing police officer, circumstantial evidence wasn't enough to build a solid case. Frustrated by the lack of progress and the absence of other leads, the investigators decided to revisit the initial stages of the investigation, looking for any oversight or missed opportunity from the 2015 search. They needed to find a human element, a witness, something that could provide context to the fragmented digital evidence. They began a meticulous recanvass of every location near the park boundaries, including those that had been dismissed during the initial investigation. It was during this exhaustive review that they finally focused on the High Alpine Lodge. The lodge, a remote seasonal establishment slightly off the main trails, had been overlooked in the initial investigation. It was considered an unlikely detour for a solo hiker focused on a demanding thru-hike. But 2 years later, with evidence suggesting Piper had significantly deviated from her planned route, the lodge became a critical point of interest. It was a long shot, a desperate attempt to find a new lead in the tangled web of the investigation. In October 2017, 2 investigators drove the winding mountain road to the High Alpine Lodge. The lodge was a rustic wooden building perched on a ridge overlooking a vast valley. The air was crisp with the scent of pine as winter approached. The atmosphere was quiet, with the tourist season winding down. The lodge felt isolated, a solitary outpost in the vast wilderness. They spoke with Quila Brasher, the owner and server at the lodge. Quila, a woman in her late 50s with a weathered face and sharp eyes, had run the lodge for over 2 decades. She knew the rhythms of the park and the habits of the hikers who passed through. She was observant, used to the transient nature of her clientele. The investigators explained the purpose of their visit and showed her a photograph of Piper Crumbweed, the vibrant, smiling image of her on a previous hike, with the mountains stretching out behind her. They asked the routine questions, not expecting much given the time that had passed.